Hey everyone, welcome back to another episode of the Wandering Road podcast. I'm your host Chris, alongside my co-host Dean, and for today's show, we're going back to exploring some cryptids, and we're going to be talking about the spooky Goatman, probably the worst cryptid I've ever heard of.
Yeah, we were talking about that before we started this today. The Goatman, you had the great idea of titling the podcast Goatman, the worst cryptid ever? Question mark. And then we were saying, like, watch, we put this out there and then we, get our asses handed to us by a Goatman. We get
Yeah,
targeted.
go hiking somewhere on a trail and run into the Goatman with the axe.
Yeah, surprisingly enough, in all honesty, that the more research I do into this Goatman, there's actually a lot of sightings from not just across the United States, but historically as well. There's this concept of like half man, half goat. Before we got on, we were kind of talking about some historical narratives on the Goatman. And you, Mr. Historian, can probably school me on a lot of this stuff. But the first thing I thought of, one of the things that the Goatman in this day and age people report seeing is that the Goatman carries an axe. It's a huge axe. And the first thing that popped in my head was, oh, that kind of reminds me of the Minotaur and in Greek mythology. And the Minotaur, I can talk about that briefly if you want, but I was wondering if there was any like bleed over of this story from ancient tradition, because you could always talk about you could talk about Pan as well. And then even talking about like the depiction of the devil, like Satan, the traditional depiction with the goat hooves and the horn and stuff like that. And when I see Goatman, I think of like the typical depiction of Satan in American culture. So like there's a lot to talk about here, but let's start with actually describing what the Goatman looks like. So
Yeah, so supposedly the Goatman is described as a half man, half goat creature, sometimes with the upper body of a man and the lower body of a goat, which, if you think back to Greek mythology and the god Pan, that's a satyr. Now, as far as the axe wielding thing, I'm not sure if satyrs actually did that. Satyrs were, I would say, mischievous in the sense that they were little horny bastards trying to always bang nymphs. So, yeah, I know. They were always chasing like the nymphs. Yeah, if you look up statues of satyrs, you'll find some unsavory statues of satyrs with large phalluses. But anyway, with the the Minotaur is more of like a half man, half bull type of creature. But I could see how people would mix that up.
Yeah.
In a sense, because the Minotaur did wield some sort of weapon. Some people say it was an axe. Some people say it was a club. But if you look at pop culture, when they show a Minotaur, it's usually wielding an axe, similar to what some people have claimed that the Goatman carries. I wanted to save this for later, but I just want to jump right into this. The Goatman carrying an axe. Apparently there was a sighting in Maryland where they dub it the Maryland Goatman.
Okay.
That if you do something wrong to the Goatman in Maryland, I don't know if you like try to hunt it or something like that, the Goatman's going to come back and hunt you down and attack your car with an axe for revenge. Now, the whole axe concept is interesting to me because I've never heard of a cryptid wielding a weapon.
Yeah, I was just thinking that. Like, when have you ever heard of like a creature? And the other thing too, to tack on that no one really states. So you could talk like about cryptids like Bigfoot or Chupacabra or whatever. They just seem in the stories to be animals. Like they don't really have. I mean, I guess you could argue that Bigfoot, if Bigfoot existed or exists, then it would have some kind of like sentient conscious awareness or whatever. But if there is a Goatman and he's carrying an axe, that kind of says like like he has more human in him than goat. So like he actually can think and plan and plot. That's kind of creepy in a way, right? I mean, like I think that there's something to be said about cryptids that will just like come after you and ravage the shit out of you, just tear you apart. But the Goatman story seems more methodical. Like you were saying, like you piss him off, you do something, he's aware of you, and then he'll plan to come after your ass. And actually, as you were talking, I was Googling some new searches here, and there's actually some videos, Facebook and YouTube, people supposedly going after the Goatman, like trying to find him. And like there's some videos of supposed captures of him on screen. And I honestly had no idea that this lore was out there so hard before today. It's funny.
Yeah, because for me, when I think of the goat man, like you said a few minutes ago, it's your prototypical depiction of Satan, right? This goat
Yeah,
type
yeah.
of figure that everyone is afraid of. So I mean, it's yeah, I know we joked when we started, potentially the worst cryptid ever. But this is starting to turn into potentially one of the scariest cryptids ever because he
Yeah, I can
seems to
see that.
be aware of who you are, remembering trying to come after your ass.
And I actually didn't know this until today, but I've seen this photo before. So if listeners, if you go Google Goatman, just put in Goatman, one word, and go to Google Images. The second, third, or fourth image is this grainy black and white, like hunting camera photo. And the face kind of looks fake, honestly. Like it looks a little bit photoshoppy, but it's still creepy as hell. Oh, I didn't even notice that there's like a dead body like right next to him as he's crouching over it. I've seen this photo before. It's an older photo, and I had no idea till today that it was like depicting the quote unquote goat man, and it looks like it was Plainville, Texas, that this was taken. There's also another one. It's like a grainier shot, looks more like a zombie coming after you from the ground. Do you any thoughts on these pictures here?
So are these supposedly captured on a trail cam or something of that sort?
I think so. That's what it looks like.
That's interesting. I'm going to be the skeptic.
Yeah. Oh, me too,
Maybe these are maybe it's somebody in a costume. I don't know. It's just the face that gives it away. It looks like it was kind of badly photoshopped
yeah.
because like the
It's
face, the way it is, it's like looking
to the
away.
side. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. It looks like it was
There's
just
no depth. Yeah.
no, 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 no. Yeah. But regardless, if that picture is real, that's
Yeah.
freaking creepy.
It is still creepy, yeah, and some of these other photos as well. And it's interesting that the other aspects of Goatman that pop out in our research, like all the connections to supposed sightings across the globe. So not just like historically, you can even tie in if you really, really wanted to, like what's his name, Krampus. So Krampus, if you're not familiar, is like this goat creature who is like the antithesis to Santa Claus. Like he comes after bad boys and girls and like punishes them and I think he's part of is it like Nordic culture? I'm probably gonna look like an asshole not knowing exactly what part of the world, but I think it's like,
I think it's like Central Europe,
Finland.
like
Oh, it's
from
essentially okay.
like German and
German too. Okay, that
yeah.
makes sense. I'm sure it's in more places than one in Europe. But so yeah, it's a European lore. That's another thing I think about when I think about the Goat Man. So what's most interesting to me so far are the actual stories, which we'll talk about. And you kind of touched on one already with the Maryland incidents. Um, but I'll tell you my favorite one that we were kind of joking about. It kind of started off jokingly because of the name, but then the more you look into it, it's actually there were some deaths involved with this urban legend in this particular location regarding Goatman, and it's called the Pope Lick Monster. And yes, you heard me right. I said Pope Lick, as in like a pope who is licked by something, maybe a monster. But if you're confused, as you're as confused as I was, why would someone call this monster a Pope Lick monster? It's because the sightings occurred in and around Louisville, Kentucky, in a place called Pope Lick Creek. So I'm also kind of confounded and interested in why someone would name a creek Pope Lick. I'm sure it's it's benign, but to me, it kind of conjures up silliness. Silliness aside, it is essentially what we've been talking about. This part sheep or goat-like creature that's been reported over the years hanging around the Pope Lick Creek trestle bridge. And this trestle bridge is in Fisherville in Louisville, Kentucky, and it's a very very old bridge. I'm not sure how old it is. It's got to be at least 100 years old. It looks very very old. It's a trestle, so that means that it's only for trains to pass over the creek. And the first attested sighting in this storyline appears to be 1988. And in 1988, there was essentially like a 16-minute film that premiered in the theater. It was, shot in around Pope Lick Trestle. It was basically someone coming up with an idea of a monster and they made a little tiny movie about it. I know for a fact that the Goat Man has been around before this in terms of sightings. So I'm sure someone kind of took that idea from another part of the world or the United States, but I guess it caught on. What eventually happened was some local teenagers who saw this movie, this low budget movie, decided to go look for this Goat Man. So they're basically going out at night, see the first instance of a death of a young person going after this monster based off of the movie. was Jack J.C. Charles Baum II. And unfortunately, 17-year-old J.C. was hit and killed by a train as he was trying to traverse the trestle looking for this goat creature. And I'm actually like, I'm wondering now, like, I wonder if we can get our hands on that little film they made. Probably not. I don't even know how you'd begin to search for something so small that was just showcased in like a tiny theater. But it would be interesting to see like how they portrayed the Goat Man in there. So this second death in 1994, this kid, he flips over his ATV, his all-terrain vehicle, and gets pinned underneath that, and then a train actually comes and kills him. Which I can't imagine. Like that's tantamount to being tied to a railroad track, like in the old cartoons. Like the sinister dude like ties the damsel to the train track and you see the train coming. Like
Right.
that scares the shit out of me.
Hmm.
Um,
So that poor dude, he gets trapped under his ATV, like you said. He gets run over. In 2000, a 19-year-old fell to his death after encountering a train. In 2016, a tourist, Raquel Bain from Ohio, got hit by a train and died searching for the monster. Her boyfriend survived by hanging on the side of the trestle. The most recent person that passed away was Savannah Bright, who was 15, and this occurred on May 26, 2019. She was pronounced dead at the scene after she and another teenage girl were on the train tracks near the Poplick trestle. They didn't specify, what particularly happened, but
that's
I
crazy,
assume
isn't it?
she got hit by a
Yeah,
train or something of
yeah.
that sort.
Can we talk about that for a second real quick? Getting hit by a train. Like I mean, I can't imagine a scarier thing to be trapped on a stretch that there's nowhere to go and you see, because I mean, I think like a lot of people would be like, "Well, how do you get hit by a train?" Like you can hear it coming from literally a mile away. But I think the point is that the trestle is very, very long and there aren't any like side places to like hop off the track onto. And the only other way is down, probably, presumably onto like rocks and shallow water below, like 100 feet below. So you got death in any way you're going. I also just have to say for a sec, like the boyfriend of that girl, Kel, he hung onto the side of the trestle, which is to me like it's really smart, but it's also terrifying and terrible because he probably knew his girlfriend wasn't able to have the strength to hold on to the trestle like he did, and he wasn't able to hold her up as well. So like that's horrifying. Trying to like probably watching that, just tying it all the way back. This goat man creature in this particular instance, notice that no one like claims to have seen the goat man. Like no, there's no reports of the actual sighting. This particular story to me is turning more into like a paranormal kind of like cursed sort of story, maybe even a
A
tulpa
cursed
kind of thing.
location.
Yeah, like a cursed location or like a tulpa kind of thing where like people want this creature to be real so bad, this murderous creature, that they put themselves in situations over and over again that inevitably result in their death anyway. So it is strange that so many people have been caught and killed by these trains over so many years just looking for this one goat man creature. I think there's something there to talk about in a creepy aspect.
That film that was created, that short film, might have had something to do with it. Like you said, the whole Tulpa situation where people wanting this to be real type of thing and going hunting for that quote unquote Poplick monster. So quite unfortunate that people lost their lives. I want to jump right into some of the notable encounters that folks have had with the Goat Man. And we'll start with the Maryland Goat Man. So this young couple claimed they had their car parked on a secluded road near Fletchertown Road for a late night date. They said as they were talking, they heard strange noises and saw a large shadowy figure approach their car. They described the figure as half man, half goat, wielding an axe, and it smashed the car window, terrifying the couple who managed to escape and report the incident.
That kind of reminds me of the Mothman stories, which we touched on. We had a podcast on that a while ago. I mean, the Mothman to me is like one of the coolest stories because there's so many people who had so many sightings of it. But if you were a cryptid and you ran into somebody, you would probably want to run into a bunch of young kids in a car who are just messing around, right? Like you don't want to run into like a police cruiser, or you want to run into like some worker who has like more maturity or whatever. On the flip side of that is, like the BS aspects, but then you have to question like why would they put themselves out there to report that? So the last thing I feel like you can go in terms of skepticism is they just riled each other up and they made it, they were seeing something different, but then they filled in each other's stories. It sounds like it's very rooted in culture. So I think that there's probably a lot more depth to the story. Oh,
But wait, there's
wait,
more.
there's more.
More.
Oh shit. I ruined your setup by going on a tirade for like 2 minutes, so we can cut this shit.
Asshole. No.
My bad.
No, you're
I'm
good.
gonna
We're
send a
keeping
Goatman
that
on me.
shit in.
Alright.
There's more encounters in that same general vicinity, the Fletchertown Road area. So in the 70s, multiple reports surfaced from that area. Witnesses claimed to see a large hairy creature wielding an axe, some people describing it as a half man and a half goat. Several local teens reported being chased by the creature while driving through the area. Oh, this part makes me sad. There's been pet disappearances. Residents of Prince George's County have reported numerous instances of pets, especially dogs, disappearing under mysterious circumstances, where some locals believe that the Goatman is responsible for these disappearances, preying on their pets to eat them.
As you were talking about that, my first thought was like, I wonder, like when I think of Maryland, I don't think about, bears or anything or any particularly dangerous predators. But just looking it up, I mean, there are a couple, but none of them are anywhere close to being associated with a bipedal goat man creature. So they've got coyotes and bobcats and raccoons are the primary ones, I think. Coyotes are like kind of big-ish, like kind of like similar to a dog, I guess, like a medium-sized dog, but that's about it. That's about the biggest you got. So I think to me that notches this story's credibility and interestingness like up a lot. Like I said initially, it's you can't really associate or confuse. I don't even think there's any like actual wild goats in Maryland.
There's
So that is,
bears, but
are
it
there
would be
bears? Okay.
Mhm. There are black bears, but it would be kind of fucking hard to confuse a black bear with a goat. And I don't think bears wield axes,
Right.
so it's kind of interesting there. But I think it's good that you point out, the potential wildlife that live within that area. Could have well been maybe a bear or something like that. But I think the one thing that I keep going back to is, why does he have a fucking axe? Where did he get the axe from?
Right.
Where the fuck? Did he go to like Lowe's or something and was like, hey, I need an axe? Like, what are you doing, goat man? Are you like splitting logs? What are you doing there, man? Cutting down trees? Which
I love like going into lore like this because then that's how you get really creative and think like you just said, like, oh, maybe he's building like cabins and like what?
maybe he's trying to build a cabin in the area and these damn kids keep coming around and messing with his cabin. So he's like, you know what? I'm going to chase these fuckers out with my axe. And if they come by again, I'm going to smash their car windows in. Talking about the legends of the origins of the Goatman in Maryland, apparently there's a popular legend. The Goatman is said to have been a scientist who worked at the Beltsville Agricultural Research Center and conducted experiments on goats. And one experiment went wrong, transforming him into the Goatman.
The worst comic book ever that I've ever heard of.
He
Like,
got bit by a radioactive
origin-
goat.
the origin story. I personally like this dude. He's got some good, some bad popularity out there, but this guy, if you're not familiar, like old SNL days, Jim Brewer also had this character on SNL called, I think it was like Goat Boy or something. Look it up. It's like one of the funniest skits I've seen, like a classic funny skit that a lot of people forget about. Basically just him interviewing people, but he looks like a goat man. When I think of like this story about the scientist, I think about Jim Brewer's portrayal of Goat Boy, because it's like you get bit by a radioactive goat, or even if you like he spliced his DNA and like something went wrong. I just imagine him eating a can or something like he can't control himself, and like the comedy that would ensue from such an idea. I think somebody should do that. Somebody would make a movie like a comedy about that or something. I think it'd be really funny. But we're getting off topic. I'm sorry.
Yeah. Back to the goat man. So in the 1980s, a group of hikers in the woods near Bowie reported seeing a tall, hairy creature with goat-like features. The hikers said that the creature let out a high-pitched scream and charged at them, causing the group to flee in panic. They later recounted describing the goat man as having glowing eyes and an unsettling presence. It's better to have glowing eyes than a glowing crotch like that one Bigfoot story that Kristen told us.
Still one of my favorite stories, and I love it, man. Never heard it. Never will hear anything like that again. It's so unique.
Yeah, I know. So that about covers the Maryland goat encounters. the Maryland Goatman encounters. So we've had an instance in the 60s where two teens claim to have seen him and saying that the Goatman smashed their windows. In the 70s, we have townspeople saying, like, hey, we've seen the Goatman. Teenagers claim to have been chased by him. And I think the one thing that, really like gets my attention is one, pets disappearing, and two, the constant presence of an axe in the Maryland stories.
Yeah. Yeah.
I just keep going back to the axe. What is he doing with the axe? Which clearly means he's smart enough to know what that tool is, that it's a weapon. And the fact that he's taking revenge on people means he has an understanding of who people are. He has a good memory. Whereas with other cryptids, like if you say, I don't know, I guess Bigfoot's not coming around with a big ass rock to come and smash your head in if you try to find him. Bigfoot's trying to run away from you. This motherfucker wants to smoke. Goatman wants to smoke. That should be a t-shirt. A Goatman with an axe. The Goatman wants all the smoke.
Got a little bud hanging out of his mouth.
A little.
I think, in my honest opinion, I think a lot of people who see the Goatman might be on in Maryland. What are you guys smoking in Maryland? Jesus. But I got to touch on the axe as well because one more time, because the one thing I think about is like you said originally, like where would he have gotten an axe? But also I envision like him making the axe himself or something, which is kind of a cool side story. And then also like axes, if you're not familiar, like if you use an axe for a long time, it breaks down really easily. So you must have like a line of axes or an axe, like access to axes in abundance. But yeah, I think it's one thing to say that some of these people, and I think some of these people really do believe that they saw a Goatman creature. I don't want to undercut that. I also think that it's like with anything else in life where there's people who are copycats and they kind of either let their imagination run wild or they're just looking for attention. But I do believe that there are like some of these cases, like people are experiencing things that are abnormal, paranormal, or cryptid creature related. And the fact that some of these people who do believe that what they saw was true, they added that axe part, and to me that is significant in the way that you can't confuse an animal holding an axe. Like you can't, if you okay, so maybe these people saw a bear or something standing on its hind legs, even could be like a deer in the brush making weird noises. But when you incorporate, like you said, the image of the axe, that's this thing, whatever it was, carrying an axe. I mean, that's discriminate. So the only thing you have left with the tool wielding for explaining it away is maybe it was a person like messing with people, maybe like making weird noises or even dressing up in a costume. I'm sure there's been a fair number of cryptid sightings that are, people are responsible for that, just dressing up and being assholes, trying to get a rise out of people. But I still think that these older stories, there's something to them. And I actually do now, I do like more than ever the creepy lore of the Goatman because, like you said, his sentience and like his ability to think and plan and plot seems a little bit more calculated and creepy than just say like any other old cryptid who can target you indiscriminately and just like run up to you and like gut the shit out of you or something like that.
Yep. So let's move from Maryland to the Texas Goatman. I'll put it this way. I don't want to say it's the first sighting of the Goatman, but the most popular place that they say that the Goatman has been seen is at Old Alton Bridge. And it's also been called the Goatman's Bridge because this specific location has a long history of strange occurrences and sightings of the Goatman, where visitors to the bridge have reportedly seen a shadowy figure with glowing eyes, hearing hoofbeats on the bridge, and even feeling an oppressive presence. Paranormal investigators that have investigated the area has said to have documented high levels of electromagnetic activity and unexplained sounds while investigating the bridge. So what do you make of that, man? This seems to lean more towards the paranormal type of side.
Yeah, and I would probably guess that it's got some kind of paranormal aspects to it. It's not just some like physiologically based creature that actually is half man, half goat, because that just doesn't make a damn lick of sense to me. Having a hybrid like that, guess it's possible. It's more interesting to think about the Goatman as having some kind of supernatural properties. But you were saying about this bridge, the old Alton Bridge. I'm looking at the picture of it. It's interesting because it's not even that big of a bridge.
It's a
Uh,
single lane bridge.
Single lane bridge.
Single.
Okay,
Mhm.
yeah. So it's like maybe like 50 feet, 60 feet. It's not huge, and it's over a pretty small like river or creek or something. But the aspect to the story that is flipping towards the cycle or the supernatural, like you were saying, which would account for all these weird experiences that you were just mentioning. But going back all the way, this story initially goes back to the late 1930s. Think about like the late 1930s historically, what's going on in American culture and stuff like that. You've got the run up World War II, and there's some tensions there, like global tensions, and there's people are still reeling from the financial crisis, the global financial crisis back then. So I think that like tensions were running high around this time, right? Yeah, I like this story, but I'm gonna flip it back to you.
Yeah, man, I can continue with the lore of the old Alton Bridge. And like you were saying, this takes place in the late 1930s. And this story is quite unfortunate, but this is where the ghostly lore or the Goatman lore comes from. So, as we know, in the 1930s, what was still around? The Jim Crow laws. What was still around at the time? The KKK. Very prevalent and very strong in the area. With this Goatman story, the belief is based on the legend of a black goat farmer named Oscar Washburn, who was said to have moved his family to a residence just north of the bridge. A few years later, Washburn, having become known as a dependable and honest businessman and dubbed the Goat Man by locals, displayed a sign on the Alton Bridge reading, "This way to the Goat Man." The success of the black man was unwelcome to many, and in August of 1938, Klansmen and the local government crossed the bridge and kidnapped Washburn from his family. They hung a noose on the old Alton Bridge, and after securing it around his neck, threw him over the side. When they looked down to see if he died, the noose was empty. In a panic, they returned to his family home and slaughtered his wife and children. Locals warned that if you cross the bridge at night without headlights, as the are said to have done, you will be met on the other side by the Goat Man. Ghostly figures and strange lights are said to appear in the surrounding woods, as well as reports of visitors being touched, grabbed, and having rocks thrown at them. And this is where the legend of the Alton Bridge Goatman comes from. So you actually have an individual that was a goat farmer. Essentially, if you put two and two together, his untimely death and violent death probably led to him becoming a vengeful spirit. I guess he manifested himself as like a half man and half goat in his anger and frustration. From then on, people have claimed to have encounters with this goat man.
And one extra bit to add on to this lore that I find fascinating is the story also goes that this goat man that came from Washburn or was manifested by Washburn after his death, he actually doesn't go after everybody. Part of the legend is because he only goes after anybody who essentially has a blood tie to the Klansmen who were responsible for him and his family's death. Which, by the way, holy shit! Like I didn't know. Like this is such a heavy story. I hate stories like especially the aspect where they like because I've heard lynching stories over the years and they're always terrible. They usually involve the destruction of the entire family, not just or the head of the household or whatever. But it is pretty interesting how this idea of the goat man came from the fact, which is in actual fact, this dude Washburn was a goat farmer and it adds an extra air of creepiness, extra flavor of creepiness to the story that he used to put up a sign on that bridge say this way to the goat man. I don't know if that's true or not. I mean, that might have been added later, but I do think that it does make sense that if he was trying to advertise, he would have done that. But the key takeaway for me here, like regardless of whether or not any of this creepy stuff got added later, like oh the Klansman looked down and the noose was empty or whatever, like who knows what actually truly happened. But I think the point is, like you said, the strange occurrences that have been happening around that bridge to this day. It's not just sightings, it's also phenomena like lights and different kinds of readings on like whatever technology they use to pick up signals and stuff like that for paranormal purposes. These are real data points or like actual things that could be measured and reported on. And I don't think we've had that in this broad Goatman story until now. So that is pretty interesting to me.
Yeah, that's pretty shitty too. Like you're just a dude trying to live your life and be left alone and people are just cunts. But anyways, so continuing with the Texas Goatman, with that bridge in particular, in the early 2000s, a group of friends went there at night to try to test the legend calling out to the Goatman. And they claim that they saw a misty humanoid figure with horns materialize on the bridge. The figure began to move towards them and they felt an overwhelming sense of dread and they ran back to their car. They ended up driving away. There's another encounter by the bridge where a family was camping near the bridge and they reported hearing strange rustling noises around their tent at night. When they investigated, they saw a large figure with goat-like legs and a human upper body standing at the edge of their campsite. The creature let out a deep guttural growl before disappearing into the woods, leaving the family shaken. Dude, what the fuck?
And you got the whole family seeing it too. So
yeah, so that's
unless there's like heavy coaching going on, it's like there's something.
Oh, absolutely. Especially in an instance of shock and fear like that. The thing with the groups of friends, they're stupid kids being mischievous. So they'll probably say anything to get attention. But when you have a family camping that's just kind of minding their own business and you see something like that, I'm sure there were probably children with them as well. That one I probably give more credence.
Yeah, same here. So yeah, let's continue on this strangely deep bench of stories for Goatman. Switching over to Wisconsin. So there was a Wisconsin Goatman, apparently. There's only a couple stories from Wisconsin, but I still think that they're intriguing and worth touching on, especially the barn incident. But the two are the roadside encounter by a truck driver and barn incident. And again, once again, we have another case here where like both instances are very rural. They just don't have a lot of ties close to cities or whatever. So in the particular roadside one, in the 1970s, there was basically a truck driver who was just, doing his normal route, just traveling through Wisconsin at night, long stretches of road. If you're not familiar with Wisconsin, probably very dark. And the only light he probably had was his headlights. As he was driving, he noticed this figure down the road standing on the side. Probably was able to tell at that point, like, oh, this is not an animal. This is like a man or something. Like this is something standing on two legs. So he got intrigued and he got closer. He started like squinting his eyes, I'm sure, and like he saw that this thing was hairy all over, like head to toe. So now he's like really focused. He's like, what is that? He gets closer and closer. And he slows down. I'm guessing like maybe in my imagination, the creature is probably on the opposite side of the road, because he's slowing down to get a view from his high truck and he's looking out of the driver's side down at this thing on the other side of the road. So he's slowing down, he looks over, and this thing suddenly turns around and acknowledges that he's right there, that this truck driver is right behind him. The truck driver reports later on that this creature had the face of a goat with the quintessential glowing red eyes that we talked about, and then the body of a man. Very tall, very muscular looking, like a traditional image of this, but like that's the key takeaway. It's like this thing is tall, like this thing is big. And then the driver reported that just basically stunned, slack-jawed the shit out of him, and he just kept driving on. And he told the story later. I mean, I guess you could say like, yeah, there's only one encounter, so one like lonely truck driver probably told this story to the next like people that he met at the next stop or whatever, but still it's a creepy story and it's in line with the sightings that we've seen before.
Dude, real quick about like truck drivers, I would take their word over anyone else because they're the ones driving all over the country.
Yeah, that's true.
At
The truck
wee
drivers,
hours of the night.
yeah, they see the weirdest shit. Yeah, I agree with that statement for sure. I think that I would say like most truck drivers are people who are just doing their job and they're not out there to like make waves and like kick shit up for the most part. Yeah, you added that extra bit that I didn't really think about that's worth mentioning, and they drive weird hours and they're out in the middle of nowhere. And I'm sure like we should try to, I wonder if you could do like a study, like, whoever's been a truck driver or like a transportation person in the middle of the night across the United States, like what are some crazy things that you've seen?
If anyone listening to this is a truck driver and you've seen weird stuff, share your story with us. We'd love to have you on the show too. That would be fucking awesome.
Yeah,
because
I never thought of that till now.
Yeah, I truly think that truck drivers see like the weirdest shit aside from lot lizards. But
gross. You remember that one? What was that one? Always Sunny in Philadelphia. The lot.
Yeah.
Just get you boys. If I just get you boys in that room, you know, like we should have a good old time. And he's like, no, no, sir, you don't want to know that those days are behind you. I wonder like what real truck drivers thought about that scene.
I I
Anyway,
know.
okay.
Yeah, on top of that, other people that if they claim to have seen weird stuff would be highway patrol people too, or just police officers in general
That's
that
true.
patrol
That's
at,
true.
like, weird hours of the night. But I'll let you continue with the Wisconsin goat man.
And one more thing I will mention, I don't know if I brought this up in podcast before. It's not really worth going too deeply into because it was just a one-off, but I was driving years and years and years ago. When I was still living in Pennsylvania. I was going to visit a friend in Ohio, like right across the border from PA, and it was still quite a drive. And it was like I left pretty late, so it was dark and there was no one out. But when I got to this like small town, I don't even remember the name of this town in Ohio. I was like kind of driving through the burbs, like coming down this side road. Just picture like a very narrow, small ish road. The road is kind of up above the homes a little bit. So you're looking down into kind of a valley, and there's just home after home, like a traditional suburb looking place. But to the left of you, as you're driving in down this road, is just brush, and it's very thick brush, and it's maybe like a berm behind the brush, and then it dips down a little bit, and then there's just a tree line with like trees that are towering on the other side of this thick brush, this thicket. I was driving, I think it must have been like midnight because I had been driving for a while. It was like 2-hour drive or something. My windows were down, and it was like a warm summer evening, and it was pretty nice outside. But I was driving slowly down this road, and I heard the most guttural, disturbing, animalistic sound that I've ever heard in my life. And it happened like right next to my car in the brush. I don't think I was driving a little, like I was driving not fast, but like fast enough to where I couldn't turn around and look at the location where I heard the sound. So I don't know if this thing was like rustling the branches or something like that, but it made a sound right as I was passing with my open window, and it just hit my ear, and it just freaked the shit out of me. Like I thought about that for like weeks afterward because the sound, I'm not going to try to replicate it because I'm going to make myself sound like an idiot, but just think about the most guttural, like, okay, I'll do it. No, it wasn't like that. It was probably a deer, honestly, but still at nighttime, like you said.
It was one of those screaming goats. You
Yeah.
ever seen those videos?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, those are so funny, man. I remember those. Those floated around the internet for a while. Those memes of the screaming goats just like sounding like a person screaming as loud as possible. But so whatever this thing was, it was probably a deer because deer make some weird ass sounds. But it reminds me of this story about the trucker, and like we were saying, when you drive at night and it's all quiet and people are sleeping, people aren't out, the animals are more active and etc. So you probably tend to see and hear very, very strange things. So yeah, let's get people who've got stories like that. I love that.
You're fucking crazy for driving with your windows down at night. Like, what the hell is wrong with you?
You grew up in
You
like
deserve Goatman to come after your ass.
well,
Dummy.
I agree with you, and I think the reason you say that because your ass grew up in a tough neighborhood with like where you don't want to drive around with your windows down, but my ass grew up in like the middle of nowhere where shit doesn't really happen like that, so I felt pretty safe.
I mean, aside from a goat
yeah,
man chasing you with an axe, you're pretty
right.
safe.
Continuing on, Wisconsin Goatman talked about the driver. Let's flip over to this other one, which is my favorite because I think there's more to talk about with this. It's just called the barn incident. So in this particular small town in Wisconsin, a farmer, just a run of the mill farmer, he began noticing some strange things going on in this barn, like things were being disturbed, moved around, livestock were acting like weird. They were more spooked than usual. And done, asterisk, most important of all, some of his equipment that he had in the barn had been moved around and seemingly utilized.
Did he take the axe?
Yeah, well, there you go. I guess, like we said, the goat man must be sentient and he must be going after people's tools to get his axes and stuff. And maybe he does like a side gig as a carpenter. I don't know. But one evening, the barn owner, this farmer, he apparently came face to face with this creature. And he said, and just like the truck driver, this thing was towering, like just absolutely hovering over him, staggeringly tall. And traditional body of the man, legs of a goat, muscular. And then, as we mentioned, the Goatman let out this loud bleat, which, jokingly, like the meme or whatever, I don't know. But like it was so viscerally terrifying to this guy that he just bolted out of the barn. Like I imagine a situation like that where you just like do the whole traditional quintessential like slow turn, and then you see this thing towering over you and you're just like frozen in fear, and then it yells at you or growls at you, and then you just snap out of it and you just run. So I think that's what this in this encounter sounds like. So what's your takeaway on these two stories? Do you have anything to add or any perspectives on the whole tool utilization thing?
I think they're both equally unsettling. The good part, not really good, but the thing with the truck driver, at least he was in a freaking truck and he was driving away from it. I mean, it would have been dumb if like the Goatman was hitchhiking and he pulled over to let him on. And he's like, "Where are you going?" "Oh, I'm headed to this small town farm in Wisconsin." Kind of left some tools in the barn, but
Goat festival.
the goat, yeah. In all seriousness, though, I think the barn incident is a bit more creepy to me. I mean, because the dude came face to face with it, and it's like, what would have happened if he came face to face with it and the Goatman like had a weapon in its hand and took his head off or something like that? So I think he got lucky there.
Definitely, yeah. And also being in the middle of nowhere. I don't know if this guy had a family or not. Probably had at least a wife or something. But you're out there in the middle of nowhere and you're doing your daily chores, and you're going through your motions like everything is normal because like you don't experience weird shit like this ever before. Like if you and I were suddenly dropped into a farm in the middle of nowhere, even if it was like a nicer, newer farm, like we would not be used to that. Like we would be creeped out like most of the time, especially at night, because we're out of our element. But this guy, this farmer, like he was in his element in the farm every single day of his life, and had no problem going out to the barn at night. Like no, he probably didn't like watch or read like scary stories, didn't really have a thought or a care about anything other than maybe like a predator, like a fox or a coyote or something like that. Like that was the biggest worry that he had. And then suddenly he's just shitting his pants at like a 7 or 8 foot tall goat man creature standing over him. And like you said, it seems like he lived to tell the tale. In my mind, this story, the goat man was just like trying to get some food or take some shelter as he was moving on, or get some like updated equipment or something like that.
Updated equipment.
Yeah. He needed a double-sided axe. He needed a hammer with the double ply.
Yeah, he was abandoning the axe and was looking for a sledgehammer.
Can you imagine like what if like the goat man, like he tried to wear like a human disguise, but it was just so clearly a goat man. He tried to go into like Home Depot. He's like, "Hey, you got any axe?" Like talk like he's looking like trying to score some drugs. Like, "Hey, you got some axe?"
Yeah,
what, like body spray?
No, we do have axes. Down this aisle, sir. They probably think he was a furry or something.
Oh my god, that's brilliant. Like that's okay. That's how Goatman gets around nowadays. He's actually one of the furries out there.
He's
Like
gone around to furry
ultra-realistic furry.
conventions.
Or better yet, he's like one of those dudes, or there's one of those people who dresses up in the cosplay in these like massive costumes that they make him look like they're so tall, but it's actually like his height. And
Yeah.
so that's how he can move around freely. He goes to these conventions.
He goes to like Goatman conventions and nobody knows it's the real Goatman.
Yeah. So if you go to a convention and like a cosplay or whatever, like an anime convention or something, and you see like some dude who's towering over you like 7 or 8 foot tall and he's not saying anything, can't see his face, you'll never know. Always get someone to say something. That's how you know. Okay,
if you see a Goatman, say something.
This is so like if these people are still listening, this is a good I love you for listening.
Yeah,
I'm pretty sure there's only like 3 people left though.
So early on we talked about potential origins for the Goatman. So in Maryland there's a theory that it was a science experiment gone wrong, or there was another theory that scientists used some genetic manipulation to create a Goatman. In Texas, we have a potential spirit of revenge. And then there's two more possibilities. There's a cryptid, potentially possible, that the Goatman is some sort of animal that hasn't been discovered yet, well, properly discovered and researched. Because just like Bigfoot, he can, or it can show up when it wants to. But the one that I find interesting is the Goatman potentially being a demonic entity. What do you think
Okay,
about
yeah.
that?
I think that, like, the least probable, um, explanation that we've talked about so far is that this is, like, an actual, like, physical creature that hasn't been discovered yet, or even if it's, like, a physiological splicing, of, like, a goat and a human. I just don't buy that. Like I said earlier, I think there's gotta be some kind of paranormal aspect to this sort of thing. As far as the demonic entity thing goes, I'm also skeptical of that, and respectfully, if you have a different perspective, that's cool. But I just go back to this idea that the traditional image of like a satyr goat creature as representing like something satanic that we have in Western culture today, that people actually will rebuke images, goat slash man like creature that they believe represents Satan or the devil or whatever. But we know, as students of history, we know, as studiers of history and religion and stuff like that, that this image, coming from Greek mythology, but also paganism in these cultures, like paganism and the Greek mythology, like these creatures aren't evil. Like they might be mischievous, they might get into some trouble, but they're not like out to steal your eternal soul. I still think it's possible that if there is like some kind of evil or demonic entity, there's nothing precluding that entity from taking on whatever image it wants to take on. And if it's occupying a time and space where humans that it's trying to go after just happen to think that a goat, half man, half goat creature like represents demonic, then maybe it will take on the form of that. But it's not its actual true form. So that's the only like hanging on that I have to this being demonic. But I think what's more likely is if this Goatman thing were real, I think it would have to be like something to do with like a disturbed or dysfunctional entity that maybe was once human. Like I hate to talk about this because like the old Alton Bridge story about the lynching is such a terrible story. I don't want to undercut the severity of that true story. We have heard stories in the past of like ghost stories where the human who used to be alive was like slighted or put through some terrible experience, and their spirit became bitter and angry, ended up going after people in the physical realm instead of like letting go or being at peace or whatever. So I'm not trying to say that that's what happened with this dude. Like my hope is that he got his respect, his due diligence, like all people did due diligence and gave him the ultimate rest and respect. But when it comes to the paranormal side, just speaking specifically about the Goatman, I think that if it was real, it'd have to be like a story where it would be paranormally rooted, not necessarily in like a demonic root. It'd have to have some kind of human paranormal overlap. Well, what are your thoughts? Like, what do you think about that?
I'll start with the demonic entity possibility. So it could be like a supernatural entity, not something that's, solely demonic in the sense that Christianity views it. It could be some sort of supernatural, old, ancient type of creature from the past
Yeah.
that, I don't know, maybe natives encountered or something like that.
Oh, that's a good point.
Some sort of ritual or something, summoning it, and then it just lingered around for eternity. But I mean, it depends on the locale. I mean, I guess if it's a supernatural entity, it could technically go where it wants to go
Yeah.
without any boundaries. So that's always a possibility. If I had to pick, I think it's probably more of a cryptid side.
Okay. Like a physical creature. That's
Yeah,
fair.
like a physical creature that is probably has the same intelligence as Bigfoot, but
Yeah.
instead of being evasive, it's confrontational in the sense
Mm.
that it'll try to avoid you, but if you try to fuck with it, it's going to find you and chase you with an axe. If I had to pick, I would lean more towards the cryptid side. But final word of the day, dude. Do you think, like Bigfoot, I think Bigfoot is real. Do you think the Goat Man is real based off of everything we discussed today.
I agree with you with the whole Bigfoot thing. But I do think that if I had to weigh all of the cryptids that I've ever heard stories about over the years, I think that this would be like on the lower rung. I think there's a lot of bleed over into like historical stories, like global historical stories, like the satyr and the minotaur with the axe and stuff like that. I think there's just too much going on with the bleed over from different cultures and stories over like thousands of years of human history for this to be an actual cryptid in the United States. I would say that like Bigfoot makes sense. I mean, Bigfoot, a lot of people argue, is rooted in actual creatures that used to be alive, like the Gigantopithecus africanus, like that huge ass ape that was like what 7.5 feet tall, that actually lived, that we have fossil records on. But when it comes to like Goatman, I don't think Goatman, if it is real, I would have to absolutely say for sure it would need some kind of like paranormal support or supernatural ties in order for it to exist, because it just doesn't make sense to me that you can have a half goat, a half man. Like we know too much about like, DNA and et cetera, like all that stuff. Like it just doesn't make sense to me. So I think that it's lower on my rung of believability. However, asterisks, I do think that people have seen things that they can't explain. Maybe they filled in the gap with the story of the Goatman, but they still saw something that was abnormal. It was not human, and it was unexplainable for any contemporary purposes that what these people went through. I would hold on to the idea that that this would be like a tulpa. This would be something that people manifest or manifested through believing in it and stories and stuff like that, to the point to where it actually became real, at least to the people who experienced them in that moment. They were manifested in that moment. But do I think that there's an actual like physical creature, a goat man or goat men, wandering around the backyards of random places in the United States with an axe? Probably not.
What you say about the tulpas, yeah, I think you have to give some credence to tulpas, because to me, that is a thing that, you get enough people believing in something in a location, they could probably conjure it up. So who knows? And hopefully, you know, us and our listeners never run into a goat man.
If you do, get on our show.
Yeah, if you do, get on our show. And I don't know, dude. I don't think the goat man is the worst cryptid ever. It's not the best, but we're gonna bump you up there, goat man. Don't worry.
We're gonna bump it up. Yeah,
we'll bump him in the top 10 because this dude wields an axe.
Yeah, that's just badass in general.
Thanks for tuning into today's episode of The Wandering Road. You can find us on Apple, Google, Spotify, and most podcast platforms. Be sure to subscribe and share. Also, don't forget to give a follow on Instagram at twroadpodcast and follow my TikTok at twrpodcast. Take care, and I'll catch you on the next one.